much. And it's so great to be in this space with all of you here. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. My name is Ray Pan, pronouns are he and him, and I am a librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And the topic will be focused on, as Davis shared, looking at how generative AI tools are impacting our work as librarians. So even if you're not in an academic library or maybe you're not in the library profession necessarily, this talk might have some ideas, questions, and thoughts to resonate with your own work. And so first, we want to do a line acknowledgement with a call to action. It's important to recognize the land that we're currently based at. So for me, I'm currently based in the Bay Area, which is the unceded Ohlone territory in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I'll pass it over to Leo.
And I'm in New Mexico. So founded in 1889, the University of New Mexico sits on the traditional homeland of the Pueblo of Sandia.
Great, thanks, Leo. And I wanted to share the call to action for all of us here is to consider donating or becoming a member or an ally of the American Indian Library Association, known as AILA. So I'm going to drop the chat here. And it's such an important group that's been around for over 40 years, supporting our Native and Indigenous colleagues and also tribal colleges and libraries across the country. And it's important that we recognize this important work that they're doing. And so being a part of this association, supporting this association is one way to consider this call to action. So first we'll do some introductions. I'll pass it over to Leo.
All right, thank you, Ray. And hello, everyone. My name is Leo Lowe, and I am the Dean of the College of University Libraries and Learning Sciences at the University of New Mexico in very sunny Albuquerque. Ray?
Thanks for sharing. It's also sunny here too in California, where I'm based at. So I am the academic and research librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education, where I support all library services as a solo librarian and also as a faculty member teaching our research seminars at this program that I'll talk a little more about later in the slide deck and how it connects to the work we're doing with generative AI tools. And so I'm really grateful to be co-presenting with Dr. Leo S. Lowe because there's just so many important work that he's been working on, and so wonderful to have this opportunity. And thank you, Metro, for giving us this opportunity to share this work together with all of you. All right, so we're going to just proceed here on the learning outcomes for today's session. We're going to be looking at the evolving role of generative AI tools and their potential benefits, harm, and promise for libraries in a general context. We're also going to try to identify those ethical considerations in using AI tools like ChatGPT for teaching, learning, and research purposes. And really, the crux of it is understanding the complex relationship between AI tools and our reality, our daily experiences and what's going on. So these are really broad ideas and outcomes to think about. And so I will pass it over to Leo.
Well, thank you, Ray. So so today we're going to talk about a technology that's beginning to permeate pretty much every aspect of our lives, from entertainment to research, and even in the realms of art and gaming. And so specifically, I want to talk about generative AI, that, you know, these models that learn from data and produce new original outputs. In many ways, they're kind of demonstrating a new form of creativity, right? So these AI models work by processing vast amounts of data. They learn patterns within them and then generate unique content based on these patterns. So, and the application of this technology is surprisingly broad. We see it in art, where, you know, AI generates fascinating abstract pieces. By the way, all the images on this slide are generated by an AI tool called Midjourney. You can see some of them, like I asked it to design a library poster for me. You can see it on the left-hand side. And I put my picture up and say, make me into a Pixar character. And that's what we made. I was like, that's pretty cute. And I just put in something that's really kind of silly. I was like, give me a picture of a baby panda, you know, in an infinity pool at, you know, in the roof of a building. And that's what it gave me. So it's pretty amazing. And some other examples for this kind of tools is, you probably heard of it, ChatGPT, and that's one of the things that generates text. But this is just the beginning. The potential of this technology really stretch into scientific theories where AI could generate hypotheses based on existing data. For example, it can personalize entertainment, it can personalize learning, where content is, tailored to individual taste. And even virtual worlds where entire kind of realities can be shaped by these creative outputs of AI models. But we want to go a little bit deeper and kind of explore how this technology might be applicable in the realm of librarianship. And we'll, talk about different possibilities and challenges. And as librarians, we're always adapting to new advancements and finding ways to improve our users' experience. And I think these AI models can really provide exciting new possibilities. All right. So possibilities, I can see quite a few there, personalized learning. There's a potential for that. If you think about, how AI can generate so much content, have so much knowledge in this database that it can kind of help students learn in very, very different ways. And is in a way is kind of helping people with different skill sets develop their skills. If we are in a classroom, an instructor can explain something in 1, 2, 3, maybe 10 ways, but an AI can do it in whatever way you want it to, and that could suit different learning styles, different abilities. Imagine a system that understands each user's learning style and preferences, and then curates resources and deliver information in the most effective way for an individual. If you've heard of Khan Academy, they're already using GPT-4 to make their tutoring system more personalized. So I can see a lot happening there. And even for librarians, specifically for librarianship, like metadata and cataloging, one of the great strengths of these large language models is the ability to synthesize a lot of information or text very, very quickly. And that can help our librarians do a lot of these things that requires that kind of ability. But at the same time, there are challenges. The first one I can already think of is digital divide. There are people who have access to this. Even in America, we do, but in a lot of other countries, maybe not. And also, even within America, there are premium versions of these tools that some people can afford to pay for and some cannot, right? How do we kind of help people have to have equal access to these new technology? And obviously, there are some really obvious ones that you have heard that ChatGPT is not that accurate. It hallucinates. So that's another thing we need to think about. And also, an AI is only as good as the data it learned from, right? If the data themselves include biases, that's what they will come out as well. So that's something we really need to kind of pay attention to. So there are ways to adapt them. I mean, so how can we as library, employees, how can we do that? I think the key is continuous learning and kind of embracing the technology. We as library workers should equip ourselves with knowledge about AI and kind of related technology. Additionally, enhancing digital literacy skills will be crucial, not just for librarians, but for our users. And we can work together. We can help them to gain those skills so that we can take advantage of these amazing technology. So we're at the very, very beginning of all this. I mean, ChatGPT came out in November, late November last year. So it's only been months. So, but I think this thing is moving so much faster than people expected. So you really want to get a head start to get a sense of where we are. So my library belongs to the association called ARL, which is the Association of Research Libraries. It's a nonprofit organization comprising about 130 plus research libraries in the US and Canada. Many of them are academic libraries, but some are not, like New York Public Library, Boston Public Library, National Library of Medicine. But anyway, so these are some of the probably most resourceful libraries. So I kind of want to get a sense of where they are. So we did a quick poll of the directors of these libraries. Remember, there are 130 plus directors, but only 19 directors actually responded. Now, that could be many reasons. They're busy, they don't, they didn't see the call. But at the same time, one of the reasons could be that some of them they don't see this as a priority, or they are not that interested in it to take part in this really short survey. But whatever that means, we have 19 responses, and there are some key findings. Most library directors see the potential of generative AI positively. When asked about their view on the potential of this in the context of library services in the next 12 months, the majority indicated a somewhat positive view, but also acknowledging the potential of these to enhance library service. Noting that there are some limitations and challenges like what we just described. A small group have a very positive view. However, some respondents held a neutral perspective and expressing uncertainty about that. But of the 19 who responded, almost none of them had a negative view. So that tells you something about the sample. The current state of generative AI adoption varies among libraries. Now, we did this in April, so it's only about 5-6 months after ChatGPT, so it's still quite new. And the survey results revealed varying stages of generative AI adoption among libraries. A few libraries are actively implementing these technology, while many are just exploring or considering in the near future. A few, although, when I said 19 of them, none of them had a negative perception of this, but a few libraries accept limited interest or have no plans to explore AI technologies within the next 12 months. But most of them, anticipate a transformative impact of generative AI on operations and services. Many of them believe that would actually change our profession, how we work. But they also noted the challenges related to potential misuse or biases of AI tools. And the libraries are actively engaging in campus conversations on generative AI. A lot of the places have these conversations going, and I'm glad to hear that libraries are part of many of those. They reported collaborating with academic integrity groups, teaching and learning groups, and data sciences group on campus. But these conversations are just still developing. There'll be an ongoing evolution of this. And finally, they recognize the need for the workforce to develop and to be trained in learning about AI. Some libraries reported hiring new staff or retraining the current workforce or plan to do so in the future. So knowing a little bit about the directors, I actually did a pretty full-scale survey on AI literacy among academic library employees from all levels, from staff to directors. And it's quite interesting. Now, I haven't finished analyzing the entire survey, but I can share some preliminary results, which is, I think, quite interesting. So the study mostly examined the library employees' familiarity with AI concepts and their hands-on experience with these tools and perceptions regarding the potential of AI in library services. So this can hopefully help us identify, strengths and opportunity for improvement, and ultimately informing some creation of, training program or framework for AI literacy in librarianship. So what is AI literacy? So I use a pretty simple definition. It's a set of competencies that enable individuals to critically evaluate AI technologies, communicate and collaborate effectively with AI, and use AI as a tool. It's pretty simple. And I actually would add, having that ethical lens in terms of using it as well. So 760 people responded, and the majority of the participants were from research libraries, followed by master's colleges, universities, and bachelor's only colleges. There's some community colleges and specialized institutions, but just to a lesser extent. So I would say it's a pretty broad representation of institution types. So as you can see on this, slide, the first question is really to ask them what's their kind of overall understanding of AI concepts and principles. If we go from red, clockwise, 1 is the lowest, 5 is very high. Most people are in the middle, in the blue, about 40-something%. And then we ask them, different the AI literacy level of different, tools or generative AI and different areas. And I have to say the average score, none of them is over 3. So they're all below average. So that's something to keep in mind. We also ask them about the perceptions of AI. There's some mixed perceptions. Potential benefits are recognized, but significant concerns about ethical issues and potential for misuse. And one quote is, library leaders should not rush to implement AI tools without listening to their in-house experts or operational managers. So we identify some barriers, but first of all, let's look at the pie chart. We ask them, do they feel adequately prepared to use generative AI? Most of them in the red, they say no, and the purple, 1 and 2s. So most people do not feel like they have enough preparation to actually use AI tools in their professional work. And there are some barriers: lack of resources, lack of technical skills, concern about data privacy and security. So this really highlights the need for education and training on AI. As a quote, quickly, education on AI is needed for librarians. As with anything else, there will be early adopters and then a range of adoption over time. So we kind of want to get a sense of the role of AI in libraries and the ethical concerns. And most people, when we ask them, how urgent do you feel that your library should address these potential ethical and privacy concerns? You can see 5, the yellow part is 5, the highest, most urgent. You can see we care. We really think that this is a problem and a area that we need to address. But there are also potential uses of AI in the libraries. A lot of people talk about collection development, user services, instruction. And like I mentioned, there are ethical concerns. Data privacy is a big one, potential misuse of AI, and then impact on human elements of librarianship, which is quite interesting because, as you probably have read on the news, there are a lot of fear or anxiety about job displacement and people getting replaced by AI. So I can see that reflecting in our responses. And then there's a quote: I could see a future where top research institutions have human reference librarians as a concierge service. So only the richer, wealthier places can afford humans. We'll see. Maybe not. I don't know about that at this point. So I kind of want to ask you a question now, because I mentioned about digital divide, whether people have used or paid for the premium version of ChatGPT. Can you tell me whether you have whether you subscribe to the premium version or not? So I'm seeing no's all the way at this point. So all right, 1 yes. And that is actually very similar to my results, my survey results. In the survey, about 93% of the respondents have not used a premium version for any generative AI tools. But there is a significant correlation or association found. People who have used these premium version AI tools and their AI literacy have some kind of association. Looking at it, it seems like people who have used this seems to have a higher level of AI literacy and slightly higher confidence in terms of using these AI tools. Now, with that in mind, I actually want more of my own staff to really explore these kind of higher premium version of, let's say, ChatGPT. So we set up a GPT-4 exploration project at my library. So basically, is that I I'll pay for 10 accounts of these the ChatGPT premium version, and it's a 12-week program. I get 10 people from different areas of my of the college, not just the libraries. I have the press and learning sciences program. So to come together and come up with their own cut project. How do you incorporate this into your workflow or your work to help you with your work, basically? And then we give them a chance to learn, like watch videos. In fact, some of my people recommended a video that Ray did, so we watched that too. So thank you, Ray. And among other things, tutorials that we found, we share them on our Share team space, and they come up with a project and documents it every week. Right now, they are in the middle of really exploring and experimenting, incorporating that into their workflow. And we share every other week. We come together and share lessons learned, and also the things that we find challenging. At the end of the 12 weeks, the final 2 weeks will basically summarize, and with the hope of, first of all, learning about how we can use these things or not, and then sharing it with the rest of the university, because our university, I mean, we think about staff, I mean, faculty and students, but staff tend to get neglected. So I want to have that information for the university administrators to see, oh, can we kind of think about using something like this and how to use it? Because like I said earlier, there are a lot of concerns, and especially with the university paying for it, we cannot upload or any kind of identifiable data up there with people's names and stuff. So we have to be extremely careful. So once the program is done, we'll certainly present our lessons learned, hopefully to you guys, to everybody. And if you're interested in doing something like this at your library, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to share our program structure so you can have a starting point. So at this point, I'm going to pass to Ray for his portion of the presentation.
Great, thanks, Leo. That was really fascinating to hear about the survey results for this preliminary stage, and also the work you're doing at University of New Mexico. And so for my work, I mentioned earlier, I am the librarian at the Alder Graduate School of Education, which is a teacher's residency program in the state of California. We are independent and accredited. And our goal is really to train, retain, and support excellent teachers, especially teachers of color, to teach and serve and reflect those communities, the diverse communities that they serve and teach in. And in my role, I am also a faculty member where I work closely with other faculty in different areas and curriculum, as well as teach in the research seminar in the Pathway program. And so at Alder, I had a chance to work with faculty members to think of guidelines for the syllabus to include, which I'll share later in this presentation. And so for that context, I wanted to move on to some of the questions and points to ask and reflect. So Leo did a great job to highlight several of these points early on in the presentation. And it bears sort of repeating in a way of like thinking about it carefully and how we approach generative AI tools. So he mentioned about this presentation I had done back in February for the Lifelong Learning Information Literacy Group, known as Lily. You could find it online. It's a group based in California. But it was in the beginning in February, we were sort of like exploring and seeing what ChatGPT 3 was like. But now we see more of it. There's more information about it. And so I want to highlight some of these points that came up from that conversation, as well as other things I've been seeing, which repeats some of the issues similarly. So the first thing that Leo also mentioned was the fake citations and publications. Certainly that's something we are thinking about and talking about. The other thing that's so important to think about is how it impacts our colleagues who are in resource sharing, document delivery, virtual reference, because many of them, as I've learned and heard, are getting these fake citations and they're spending time going through it and checking them out. Of course, some of them are pretty obvious, but some of them aren't. And so that means that they have to invest time to investigate these titles that aren't really real, right? And so even if it comes out with a DOI, which ChatGPT can also create, and so how do we address it proactively? Is there some sort of tool to vet or ensure that our users are not using whatever is coming out and then pasting it and thinking that something's going to come through from our colleagues? And so that has that impact that we need to be mindful, because those kinds of work, especially document delivery and resource sharing, they tend to be invisible work. And we want to ensure that those colleagues are respected and supported because it's really impacting them. And we might not know it. Questions about privacy, data access, and usage, and ethical issues in using it. I see some of the questions coming up from Q&A, which we'll definitely have time to talk about. But I wanted to say that it's so important to think about how we approach the issues that are coming up because of how ChatGPT and other AI tools are set up. They're becoming more like data brokering, meaning they are collecting data for whatever reasons and purposes. Certainly, they give us really good access, good tools for scaffolding learning, but there's also that concern of our privacies and data collections and things to really think about, and the ethical issues in using it, which I'll talk about later in the slide. The other important thing to think about on the other side really is universal design for learning. So stands for UDL, which is educational framework that really acknowledges and accommodates the needs of abilities of all learners. And we try to eliminate hurdles, right, in the learning process. So ChatGPT, as some articles have suggested in Inside Higher Education, as well as other preliminary research, that it supports multilingual learners. It supports those experiencing ADHD, right? And it really helps those who are autistic too, as I've learned. And so we have to think about that as a tool to support those by thinking about the importance of universal design for learning and ensuring that everyone has access to tools that support their learning, regardless of learning difference. That is often a challenge, I think, in terms of creating accommodation, but also understanding the need to really enable these tools to provide that kind of critical support. And then another point that ties into what Leo has been investigating is thinking about policies for using such a tool. As I mentioned, I worked with a group of colleagues in my university, and we came up with some guidelines kind of thing. And so I'm going to share that later. But the question is, you have to think about the perspectives of your administrators, your faculty colleagues, and then your students, right? Like, what are they thinking and about this tool that they are seeing outside of the library? Certainly, the library can take a proactive role and start having those conversations, partnering, and so forth. But they're also ingesting a lot of content about this tool from other sources like social media or word of mouth and so forth. And we have to take those perspectives into consideration when we're designing a policy, a approach, a guideline, because when you do it in a way that's inclusive of their perspectives and that sort of addresses their concerns too, and your own concerns, it really helps solidify the process of communication and being on the same page. Now, I bring you this graphic here from Matt Miller, which is from Ditch That Textbook, an organization focusing on teaching teachers. Many of you may have seen it in different channels, maybe on social media or some other presentations. And so this is a really interesting graphic here. So it says here, it's time to rethink plagiarism and cheating and what that means. Because when we think about plagiarism, we still think of maybe our time in college, right? Or in high school, right? Or that sort of definition still sticks. And then the idea of cheating. And so you could see here on the left side, there are 3 boxes. Which of these would you consider cheating? Which of these is relevant to our students' futures? And then which of these would you use in your work as an adult? So Leo pointed out in his survey, the workforce part is really critical, right? And so if you look at the scale here, it says on the green, on the top part, it says bot created, and then at the bottom, student created. And then it gets into the nuance of plagiarism and cheating, and where does it fall under? There are no sort of a black and white binary approach when it comes to plagiarism and cheating. It's all consensus driven. Like, we have to think about what that means to say it's okay to use it at this stage, but probably not at this stage. Like I just saw in the news, the Grammys, right, announced that AI actually can be used for some sort of music creation, but not songwriting, right? So they get into like the specifics into that portion. And I feel like that analogy works really well, like sort of like in this framework where you're thinking, is it something where there's bot created, student plugged in a prompt, copied response, and submitted to a teacher? Is that exactly plagiarism or cheating? Most likely, it seems like from our current definition, yes, certainly we could apply that. And then going down to the middle part, students wrote main ideas, AI generated a draft, and offered feedback to improve. So that's also in an iffy gray zone line. And then student wrote all assignments content without consulting AI or the internet. So certainly it depends on the actual curriculum, the learning outcome, because if you were in a computer science class, right, and you're trying to understand generative AI and how it creates its output, you probably think a first low stakes assignment would be plug in prompt into AI, copy response, and submit it to a teacher so that at least they're doing the task. But if you're, as sort of like a low level assignment, but if you're going to be like in a history class, right, that might not be appropriate. So it's also about the context of the class itself, which I think is important to keep in mind, because if you have a class currently that I am collaborating with a lot of faculty members, which is focusing on special education, we need to think about our students and how they think about these tools that support students with different learning differences, right? And sort of think about that and how this tool might really become that scaffolding learning tool to support their students and so forth. And maybe there is a MFA program you have in your school, which is focusing on sci-fi and artificial intelligence and sort of creating that prompt. This tool might be appropriate to use, but maybe not if you're in a rhetoric class, right? And so I think it's all contextual, but it's important where you have this graphic to really think through and talk with your colleagues, administrators, your students, and see where that lands, and then sort of come with some idea of where to start from there. So I think it's a really great question to pose in thinking about plagiarism and cheating, because it really helps us redefine the future for our students who will be employees somewhere, right? And so, and what that means when they're using such tools in the workplace. And are we thinking about preparing them in the workplace? I know Leo and I had this conversation, and one of the ideas is to think about the workplace in the future. And I was thinking, well, not all future employees will require using AI tools, right? Not all tools. And maybe if they did, then it's something that the technology might change then as well. So I have had conversations with a lot of my faculty members about this. And one of the opportunities I had was to use this tool to critically interrogate its response and its output, meaning there is a concern that this tool might replace critical thinking, might replace writing, reading. We saw it in the New York School of Education, right? They completely banned the tool. And then 5 months later, they decided, nope, that was a knee-jerk reaction, and then decided to say it's okay. So it's interesting because they're afraid of our students, right, in the K-12 environment to be using it. And so when I had this conversation with my seminar of teachers, grad students, a few months ago, we looked into a response where we did a lot of research on culturally relevant pedagogy, right? And we did some readings and we looked at this text. And then this was an activity, sort of like an icebreaker activity that I did on Zoom with them. I got ChatGPT to tell me to define culturally relevant pedagogy. And then this is what it spit out. And this is 3. So this is the version 3, okay? And then we discussed it as a group. I didn't tell them that it was ChatGPT created. And I just said, what would you think that we could do to make this essay improve? Like, what can we do to improve it? And then they started talking. We started sharing about bits and pieces based on what we read by theorists on culturally relevant pedagogy. And then we came up with like all these different ideas. We highlighted, we asked questions, we sort of looked at it from a grammatical point of view. We started thinking about citations. How do you cite it? How do you think about ways to make it more tied into the work that we're doing and sort of explaining through it? And of course, someone found out that, of course, it must be ChatGPT. And then this was like sort of a creative exercise. And then someone else asked me, well, wouldn't this create confirmation bias? And certainly it could, right? This assignment is sort of like reinforcing, like, okay, this is how it is, and we have to find citations to back it up. But that's a separate conversation to be had because we know all of our students, at least the ones I've served in other institutions, they've written the essay and then they're like, help me find references for these. And that's not how it works. But I think for this kind of exercise with grad students, it was quite interesting to see, because then they really started thinking about the theorist, right? And why wasn't the theorist included? And so this is ChatGPT 3 as an assignment if you wanted to engage with your students to think about citation practices and how to cite it in APA, at least in my context. And then I was encouraged based on my conversation with Leo last week or a couple of weeks ago, I can't recall, but it was interesting to to look at the premium version, right? And some of you, most of you said no, you haven't used it, and some of you said yes, and so forth, I think. But what I ended up doing was putting the same definition on ChatGPT 4. And this is what it came out. It cited the theorist. It didn't cite the page necessarily, or all the other information we need, but it got into like the nuance, and then it got into a succinct way of explaining CRP, which is really foundational in education, right? And so I thought to myself, this is really interesting. So I'm gonna use this prompt as well as the other one and sort of like have them think through it. And this will be a future lesson that I'll do actually next week with my seminar of new students. And so I just wanted to show you the impact of the difference between 3 and 4 and what's happening. And it goes back to what Leo shared earlier, which is that there's going to be this digital divide that's happening, right, with the technology, the skills, the access, but also even further ingrained where people who can afford ChatGPT, the premium version, will have maybe some advantages, right, some privileges to come with that. And it goes into this concept of information privilege, which is one status or affiliation to power, right, in terms of accessing information. And so I think we're going to see more of this question and concern to really think about. But I thought it was a really interesting technique to sort of think about ways to engage and interrogate the output that's coming out, which is getting more sophisticated. Now, in terms of the process part, this is the other part I wanted to share. I have worked with faculty members and sort of asking them how they are using it. So we had a couple of faculty meetings, which is similar to like a faculty senate kind of style, where all the course leads, our chairs come in. And some of them that haven't even heard of ChatGPT, which was really interesting in itself because they've been so focused on their work and their teaching. And then when we're like assessing, some of them have shared, yeah, it's been really helpful for me because I experience ADHD. And so this is really helpful. And some are saying, well, I don't know, because if you plug this assignment into ChatGPT, it'll give you the whole assignment, right? And so there was really good dialogue there. The good thing is that we're a lot smaller. So if you're in a huge institution, it can create opportunities to have multiple conversations. But of course, that's about capacity. One of the opportunities I had was to work closely with our student affairs department or student services team and thinking about academic honesty policy, which at least Leo also mentioned about different stakeholders and different groups. So we had a chance to look at that, and we had the chance to ensure how does that define something that's being plagiarized or that's cheating or that's appropriate to use. And then we had more small group discussions in the past few months. And just to be on the same page, because that's the most important part, to be consistent and have consent from everyone agreeing to this policy. Now, this is what we came up with. This is an evolving process. It's something that we are just doing for the summer because our program starts in the summer and it ends the summer or May after, right? It's a one-year intensive program. And what we came up with is a couple of guidelines here. The first is if you're going to use this tool, you have to cite this tool in APA format. We want to honor innovation, experimentation, using these tools to facilitate learning, because it's really about universal design for learning, as I mentioned. But we also want to ensure that you acknowledge that you use it by citing it, right? And there's a way to cite it on APA. And then if you do use the tool, because it generates an output, you want to quote and paraphrase the AI generated response. So you can't necessarily just take it and then just like go stop there like a mic drop. You actually have to paraphrase it because there's going to be some things that are incorrect or that are highly inaccurate. And we want to ensure that they acknowledge their reading. So it's good practice to reread what they're doing, reread what they're writing and revise from there. And then most importantly, the tools are not meant to replace your own learning, but rather to be used responsibly and enhance your own learning and engagement with the course text, reading and reflection, and so forth. And then the last part is really critical. It's a liability statement because we are seeing this tool evolving and there's some concerns and questions about the misinformation coming through and how the data is being shared, possibly in third-party sites and things like that. But I think one of the things that I had conversations with some of the faculty member is we focus a lot on positionality and reflection. Positionality meaning your identity, your sort of philosophy in teaching, and who you are as a person. And if we have a lot of students who might be identified from marginalized backgrounds, maybe they're coming in from an undocumented family, maybe they are transgender, and if they're using this tool to ask and refine their reflection, does that create some concerns? And I certainly think so. I certainly think we should be really, really careful and cautious, especially our students coming from those marginalized backgrounds, to be using this tool, because they're reflecting to themselves using this tool, and this tool is collecting information. So I think for however you feel, this is sort of my sort of reasoning. It's not clear, just like that chart I showed you. It's like bot created or student created, and it's going to be an ongoing process. Now, the other part to consider is the guardrails. So many of you are probably thinking, well, there must be something to sort of address these issues. These are just some ideas. They're not all, and it's making sense like right now to think about it for the fall, if that's when your program starts. So most importantly, you want to build trust with your students, with your faculty colleagues, and really encourage that critical inquiry of artificial intelligence tools. So Cornell University Library, they have an algorithmic literacy program. It's really interesting. They have a learning outcome addressing the biases of algorithms. And this is a good way to tie it all in. So it might address part of the question that came into the Q&A. And we're going to share these slide decks later too. So you can click on the links and take a look. Now, I think having what Leo mentioned, AI literacy is also important, and algorithmic literacy, understanding the biases within these generated tools, is also complementary. Now, omission of using ChatGPT in student papers and have students to critically reflect on the responses generated in ChatGPT, that's sort of one way to think about it. It actually is not in a way that's related to some of the discussions I had, but I think that's something, if you're teaching a class, a library 101 class, that's something you want them to disclose, right? And then sort of interrogate that tool, because that's where the critical thinking is, when you're interrogating something that's used in a meaningful and scholarly way. And if you must, this is something I've seen some places are using, GPT-0 by a Princeton student, Edward Tian, on creating and checking. It's a tool that checks papers that uses possibly ChatGPT. However, it's not 100% accurate. And I think the other nuance and the caveat is that it is an issue because it creates a surveillance culture. You're basically creating to spy on other students, or like to flag if other students are using it. It might create this distrust that can happen. And so it's something I think about whether to share or not, but I think it's a tool that's there, and if it could be also used responsibly, that might be really helpful. The issue is that if you or your colleagues are using GPT-0, it might be used to flag students who might be English is not their first language, right? Or there are already these assumptions, and then you just like assume, wait, you can't have written this way. I'm going to check. So it creates these biases, layered upon biases. And we have to be really careful about that, because you don't want to make it a punitive thing. And it's a tool to be considered, but also to be used ethically. And that's still something that remains to be seen, right? And some of the points we sort of talked about. So general impact of AI in academic libraries. I think we had talked about the hallucination, the fake citation, and how it's creating this issue on all these different departments. Our colleagues, whether you are involved or not, your colleagues are probably seeing it, right? And there's this lack of authentication that we need to really think about. And how do we work together, maybe as a whole profession, right, to create something that verifies certainly fake citations. Maybe that something's that works right now, and I'm not aware of it. But the other important consideration is this codependency behavior of our colleagues, our students. Maybe they're thinking that this tool will really support them, and then they're going to be super reliant on it. And I think that's the case with search engines. That's the case with a lot of database platforms. That's the case with LibGuides, I think. And so there's going to be this dependency, and we have to think about the long-term effects just for self-awareness. And I know some faculty members, they have said that this is their way of using academic freedom, using these tools, and that's totally their right. And then sort of seeing where they go from there. And then students using it to really help with all types of skills that they can develop over time, and hopefully are not overly reliant on these tools. And then, of course, AI embedded tools, there's so many of them that's happening. Leo mentioned earlier with some of the processes of AI, like metadata discovery. Certainly, there's some of that happening. Google Docs just released an AI feature. So we are all most of us are pretty much familiar with Google Docs, and that's already there. And my school just recently agreed to test out Grammarly, which you may have seen online, which is a tool to support writing emails and academic writing and so forth in terms of like spell, grammar check, so forth. And that is generated by AI too. But the other thing to consider is with these tools, there's data breaching that's happening. And unfortunately, OpenAI experienced a data breach that happened in May of this year, just a couple of months ago. What that means is that data that people maybe used to subscribe to ChatGPT or maybe some information, login info, that may have been circulated, unfortunately. So we don't know what the ramifications are, but it happens. And we have to be prepared and aware of them. And it goes back to my other question, which is about students who are marginalized and using this tool in a way that's safe, right, for them and for all of us to consider. Now, we have about 10 minutes left. This time is for Q&A, and we also have some questions for you all. How do you see generative AI tools impacting jobs, your jobs, and maybe library jobs in general? And then another question here is, what do you see are the main areas of concern for AI tools through library perspective? So I will stop here and see what folks are saying.